If an organization with, I don't know, millions of members, thousands of local branches, and immense social influence operates entirely without official government registration, does that make them a dark money syndicate?
Or does it just make them, brutally honest about how they actually function?
Exactly. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at an excerpt from a series called Propaganda Busted, and we are specifically focusing on a really highly publicized political row in India surrounding the RSS, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh.
Right. And for those of you who might be unfamiliar, the RSS is this massive, highly influential Hindu nationalist volunteer organization.
Yeah, they are a deeply embedded part of India's socio-political landscape, which makes this whole debate over their legal status incredibly high stakes for you to follow.
It really does. But before we jump in, we should clarify our goal today, because we are using this specific text to examine a much broader, highly debated structural argument.
For sure. The source deals with some pretty intense political commentary and prominent figures.
Yeah, so our objective today is purely analytical. We aren't endorsing the source's political viewpoint, nor are we taking a side in Indian partisan politics.
Yeah.
I mean, we're just using the text as a lens to understand a universal philosophical question.
Right, like how do modern societies actually enforce transparency?
Exactly. We're looking at the friction between the paperwork a government demands and, well, the reality of how vast socio-religious movements actually operate.
Okay, so let's set the stage. You've got Priyank Kharge, a prominent Indian politician who is publicly demanding that the RSS must register with the government.
Right. He wants them to file the paperwork.
Yeah, file the paperwork, disclose their legal status, open their books. He's arguing that an organization of that size operating outside formal bureaucratic oversight is, inherently suspicious.
Which is a demand that sounds entirely logical to anyone who grew up in a modern administrative state. You build a massive organization, you file the forms.
Right. But Kharge's demand hits an absolute brick wall when you realize the RSS leadership isn't just, missing the paperwork. They actually boast about not having it.
Yeah, and the source outlines this as its foundational data point. They label it Fact 1. The RSS is genuinely not registered as a society, a trust, or a corporate NGO under the typical legal frameworks.
Wait, really? None of those?
None of them. And more importantly, Mohan Bhagwat, the head of the RSS, has publicly and repeatedly defended this unregistered position.
Wow. So they aren't even trying to hide it.
No, not at all. The organization views itself not as a corporation or an NGO created by state permission, but as an organic movement of the society itself.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, they argue that a societal movement doesn't need a government license to exist.
Okay, so it's like imagine a neighborhood cash-only restaurant that has been open for a century. They have a massive glowing neon sign on the front door that says "Cash only." And they tell everyone who walks in that they don't take cards. Yet, you have critics standing on the sidewalk with megaphones, demanding the manager bring out the digital credit card terminals to prove they aren't hiding anything.
That is a perfect analogy, because the critics are trying to expose a business model that is already the literal logo of the restaurant.
Right. It's just out there in the open.
And, the critics outside that cash-only restaurant aren't actually trying to pay for a meal. They are trying to shut the restaurant down on a technicality.
Oh, yeah.
The source points out that because the RSS is aggressively open about their unregistered status, accusing them of a secretive cover-up fundamentally mischaracterizes the entire situation.
Because you can't expose a secret that the organization prints on its own brochures.
Exactly. The political attack is framed as an investigative exposure of a dark secret, but they are operating on two entirely different wavelengths here.
One side is weaponizing bureaucratic compliance.
Yes, and the other side fundamentally rejects the premise that bureaucratic compliance equals legitimacy.
Hold on, though. I hear the argument about the cash-only restaurant, and I get that paperwork doesn't automatically equate to ethics. But isn't registration at least a baseline requirement for a functioning society?
Well, sure, you'd think so.
Right. I mean, if we throw out the rule book just because it's flawed, aren't we giving a free pass to actual shadow organizations?
That's a fair question.
It just feels like arguing against the concept of registration entirely is creating a really convenient loophole. I mean, if you are handling millions of rupees and coordinating millions of people, shouldn't the state have a ledger of that?
So the source actually anticipates that exact reaction. It doesn't argue that the concept of corporate registration is inherently evil or useless.
Okay, so what are they saying?
Instead, it introduces what they call Fact 3, which really deconstructs the mechanics of how registration is used as a political shield.
A political shield. Interesting.
Yeah, the text argues that in the realm of massive socio-religious organizations, a registration certificate is often just an illusion of accountability.
Just an illusion.
Think about how a legally registered, fully compliant NGO can actually operate. They have a board of directors, they file their annual tax returns, they have the official government stamp.
But, I mean, that board of directors could just be entirely composed of family members and silent partners, right?
Precisely. The funds can be routed through this absolute labyrinth of subsidiary trusts, shell entities, anonymous donor networks.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
They can spend massive amounts of tax-exempt money on, like, consulting fees or administrative costs paid out to related parties.
So the legal registration proves that the entity exists on paper, but it tells the public absolutely nothing about where every single rupee truly originated.
Nothing at all. It doesn't show what strings are attached to that money or who is actually pulling the levers of influence behind closed doors.
So the source is arguing that a legally registered entity can remain a total fortress of opacity, shielded by the very paperwork that's supposed to make it transparent.
Yes. The registration form is basically a cloak of invisibility.
Right, because it gives the appearance of compliance, which stops people from asking harder questions.
Exactly. And meanwhile, an unregistered body like the RSS operates almost entirely in the public square.
Because they have, like, open daily gatherings, right?
Yeah, they have local fundraising where individuals physically hand over cash, a practice they call Guru Dakshina, and it's a highly decentralized operational structure.
So the source is saying that a decentralized, community-funded group with no formal paperwork can actually be way more visible day to day than a registered corporate trust with a pristine legal filing and a totally hidden ledger.
That's the crux of it.
Mm-hmm.
A problem arises when politicians conflate the symbol of accountability, the government form, with the ethical reality of transparency.
Right.
When a political figure like Priyank Kharge uses the demand for registration solely as a club to beat a specific opponent, they aren't actually trying to solve the problem of opaque financing.
They're just trying to force an opponent into a bureaucratic trap.
Exactly. The source emphasizes prioritizing facts over narratives here. The popular narrative is that unregistered equals sinister and registered equals pure.
Which is obviously not always true.
Right. The mechanical fact is that accountability requires rigorous, ongoing public scrutiny, not just a one-time government stamp.
Okay, so if targeting one specific group is just political theater, and the current system of registration allows for these massive legal loopholes anyway, the only logical fix here is to stop playing favorites.
Yes.
You would need a blanket rule that cuts across all these distinctions. You'd have to tear up the current piecemeal system entirely.
Which brings us perfectly to the structural solution proposed in the text. The source calls this the big question.
The big question.
Yeah, the author essentially throws down a gauntlet to the political establishment in Karnataka and really to the wider state apparatus.
Okay, what's the challenge?
If the genuine, sincere goal is a robust transparency framework, if they actually care about where money is coming from and how it is influencing civil society, then they must abandon the targeted attacks and create a single universal law that applies to absolutely everyone.
And the source gets very specific about who everyone entails, right?
Yeah.
It's a list that encompasses the entirety of India's complex socio-religious ecosystem.
It really does.
We are talking about Christian church trusts, many of which hold immense historical land grants and legal privileges.
Absolutely.
We're talking about Islamic Waqf institutions. And for you listening who might not know, a Waqf is an incredibly powerful legal entity under Islamic law.
Yeah, it's essentially a permanent charitable endowment.
Right, that manages vast tracts of real estate and commercial properties. And the list goes on to include massive missionary networks, countless religious charities, huge spiritual ashrams, and NGOs that survive on heavy influxes of domestic or foreign funds.
It's a sweeping, comprehensive net. The text advocates for a standardized framework that strips away all the historical exemptions, the religious specificities, and the political favoritism.
So what would a universal law actually look like mechanically?
Well, it would mean a centralized digital registry where, say, a WAC board managing 1,000 acres of prime urban real estate, a massive Christian hospital network, a secular foreign-funded NGO, and the RSS all have to file the exact same standardized profit and loss statements.
Man, it's like TSA at the airport.
How so?
Well, searching one passenger's bag purely because you don't like their T-shirt or their political bumper sticker doesn't make the airplane one bit safer.
Right, right.
It's just harassment masquerading as security. If you actually care about the safety of the flight, every single person's bag goes through the exact same X-ray machine, whether they're in first class, economy, or the pilot's seat.
That's a great way to put it. The source is basically arguing that Karnataka's current approach is just pulling one passenger out of line while waving everyone else through. Because the core issue at the heart of the source's argument is consistency. If the concept of financial and operational transparency truly matters to a democracy, it cannot be selectively deployed.
Right. Because when you only demand transparency from the organizations that are dominating the current political news cycle,
Or the ones that politically oppose the current government in power.
exactly, you degrade the very concept of transparency. It stops being a moral imperative and it just becomes a cheap political weapon.
Precisely. A standardized law with mandatory annual audits, strict foreign funding disclosures, similar to a uniformly applied Foreign Contribution Regulation Act and open public ledgers, would level the playing field.
It completely moves the conversation from a petty, localized political squabble into a massive debate about systemic reform.
It really does.
I mean, we started this deep dive looking at Priyank Kharge's targeted demand against the RSS, and we saw how that demand clashed with the actual mechanical reality of an organization that intentionally operates as an unregistered, decentralized mass movement.
Yeah.
And then we unpacked the friction between the bureaucratic act of filing paperwork and the ethical reality of operating transparently.
Right, recognizing that a corporate registration can really easily function as a shield for dark money.
Right, all of which culminated in the source's call for a universal transparency law, a single rigorous standard of financial and operational disclosure for all socio-religious groups, charities, and NGOs, regardless of their theology, their history, or their political alignment.
It is a highly compelling argument for structural fairness.
It's a brilliant theoretical solution, but man, it leaves us with something pretty massive to chew on regarding the actual execution of it.
Oh, absolutely. The source makes an airtight case for universal fairness. But if we take that idea out of the realm of theory and try to apply it to the messy reality of a massive, incredibly diverse democracy, we hit a fascinating paradox.
Paradox.
Yeah. Think about the sheer logistics and the philosophical implications here. If a state apparatus actually attempted to build this universal dragnet, if they tried to force every single distinct religious denomination, every tiny neighborhood spiritual group, every massive historical endowment, and every grassroots charity to conform to one single, rigid, state-mandated financial reporting structure.
Wow, yeah. You are talking about an astronomical level of state intervention into the private lives of citizens.
Exactly.
I mean, when does the pursuit of absolute transparency cross the line into total state surveillance of civil society?
It's a really fine line.
We place so much faith in paperwork,
Yeah.
in this comforting idea that if the government just has a form for everything, corruption will disappear.
But forcing the entirety of human belief, charity, and community organization into a standardized government spreadsheet might not build trust at all.
No. It might just be viewed as an unprecedented, heavy-handed overreach where the state demands the right to monitor every aspect of civil and spiritual life.
It's definitely something to think about.
It really is. Well, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we will catch you next time.